The suburbs are where dreams go to die, but only after they've been painted taupe, pressure-washed into submission, and forced to conform to a strict 3-inch grass height regulation. I should know. I live there. My particular slice of beige paradise is called the Manors at Quail Creek, a name so aggressively pleasant it sounds like a threat. We don't have manors, and I haven't seen a quail since we moved in, presumably because they were cited for having non-conforming plumage. I was a recent transplant, a refugee from the city. My wife, Chloe, and I had traded a vibrant, noisy apartment for a 4-bedroom house with a 2-car garage and a backyard the size of a postage stamp that backed up to another identical postage stamp. The move was a compromise. She wanted safety and good schools. I wanted to not lose my mind from the crushing, oppressive silence. My job as a graphic designer had recently gone fully remote, which meant my daily commute was now a 10-step shuffle from my bed to my desk. This left me with an alarming amount of free time to stare out the window and contemplate the existential void of cul-de-sac life. Every house was the same shade of greige. Every mailbox was the same bronze-finished obelisk. Every lawn was a chemically dependent carpet of unnaturally green fescue. This wasn't a community. It was a copy-paste error, and it was driving me insane. "I need a project," I announced one Tuesday morning, staring at my neighbor, Bob, as he used a level to ensure his decorative lawn flamingos were perfectly perpendicular to the ground. Chloe looked up from her laptop, a brow arched in that way that meant, "Please don't say you're going to start a podcast." "A project? Like organizing the garage?" "No, a real project, something wholesome, something that connects us to the earth." "We have a succulent," she offered. "His name is Bartholomew. He seems to be thriving." "I'm talking about chickens," I said, the word feeling revolutionary on my tongue. A small coop in the backyard, 3, maybe 4 hens, fresh eggs every morning. Imagine it, Chloe. Little rustic charm in the middle of all this. Vinyl siding. I painted a beautiful picture of a pastoral fantasy. Me, in a straw hat, collecting a basket of warm, brown eggs as the sun rose. It was a lie, of course. I don't own a straw hat, and I don't do anything before 9 a.m., but the idea was golden. Chloe was cautiously optimistic. "It does sound nice," she admitted. "But you know how the HOA is, Leo. Did you read the handbook? The entire handbook?" I waved a dismissive hand. The handbook was a 3-ring binder, thick enough to stop a bullet, delivered to us at closing by a woman with a terrifyingly fixed smile. I had used it to prop up a wobbly table leg. "It's a few chickens, not a cattle ranch. How bad can it be? They're basically feathered pets that give you breakfast." "That feathered pet logic is what's going to get you in trouble," she warned. But she was smiling. The dream was alive. Trying to be a responsible, rule-abiding citizen of Quail Creek, I drafted an email. I didn't just ask if I could have chickens. Oh no. I wrote, "To the esteemed members of the Architectural Review Committee, I would like to submit for your consideration a proposal for the installation of a small-scale, artisanal poultry enclosure designed to blend seamlessly with the aesthetic values of our community." I used words like sustainable, hyper-local, and educational. I made it sound like I was opening a tiny organic Whole Foods in my backyard. The response came back in less than 24 hours. Not as an email, but as a stiff, cream-colored envelope placed in our perfectly regulation-compliant mailbox. It was from one Brenda Wexler, HOA president. The letter was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive corporate speak. It began with, "Thank you for your inquiry regarding your proposed agricultural endeavor," which was her way of saying, "How dare you?" It then politely directed my attention to the monolithic handbook I was currently using as furniture support. "As you will find in the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, Article 4, Section 8, subsection C, clearly states, "No livestock or poultry of any kind shall be raised, bred, or kept on any lot." It went on, a symphony of condescension about maintaining property values, community harmony, and sanitary standards. Brenda had even highlighted the key phrases in yellow, as if I were a child who couldn't grasp the simple concept of her absolute dominion over my life. I stormed back inside, waving the letter like a declaration of war. "They said no!" I fumed, collapsing onto the sofa. "Poultry! This isn't a factory farm, it's 3 hens! I was going to name them Meryl, Cluck, and Yoko Ono." Chloe read the letter over my shoulder and gave me a sympathetic pat. "I'm sorry, honey. I told you Brenda doesn't mess around." But it was too late. The switch had been flipped. This was no longer about fresh eggs. This wasn't about a wholesome project. This was about principle. This was about a woman named Brenda telling me I couldn't have a few harmless birds because it might upset the delicate beige balance of her little fiefdom. I looked out the window at the oppressive sameness of it all, and a fire was lit within my soul. A fire fueled by pure, unadulterated spite. That night, I rescued the HOA handbook from its duty as a table leveler and spread it across the dining room table. With a mug of black coffee and a grim sense of purpose, I began my campaign. I wasn't looking for permission anymore. I was looking for a weapon. For hours, I waded through the dense legalese. I read about fence heights and acceptable shrubbery. I learned about the approved color palette for front doors, a thrilling spectrum from desert sand to slightly darker desert sand. It was a journey into the heart of suburban darkness. And then around 2 a.m., I found it. Article 4, Section 8, subsection C, was indeed ironclad about poultry and livestock. It even listed examples: chickens, ducks, geese, turkeys, cows, pigs, goats. They had been thorough, but they had made one fatal error. They had assumed a common understanding of the English language. I flipped to the section on pets. Article 5 was much looser. It allowed for common household pets, such as dogs and cats. But then, tucked away at the end, was a vague, beautiful clause. "And other animals may be kept for security purposes, provided they do not create a nuisance." It was clearly written with German shepherds in mind. My fingers flew across my keyboard. I typed, "Legal definition of poultry." My screen filled with agricultural codes and statutes. Poultry, legally speaking, referred to domesticated birds kept for eggs or meat, specifically from the orders Galliformes, like chickens and turkeys, and Anseriformes, like ducks and geese. A manic grin spread across my face. What wasn't on that list? My next search was more specific. Large, flightless birds not legally poultry. The answer appeared, glowing on my screen like a holy scripture. Ratites. The family of birds that includes ostriches, cassowaries, and, most importantly, emus. They were in a different order entirely. They were not, by the cold, hard letter of the law, poultry. My final triumphant search was registering an emu as a guard animal. The results were a murky collection of libertarian forums and questionable legal advice blogs, but the consensus was clear. If you can make a case for it, in some places you can do it. And I was damn well going to make a case. I stumbled into the bedroom, the handbook held aloft like a trophy. Chloe was half asleep. "Honey?" I whispered, my voice trembling with giddy revelation. "The HOA banned chickens." I know," she mumbled into her pillow. "They said nothing," I continued, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "About prehistoric murder turkeys." Chloe's head shot up. Her eyes were wide in the dim light. "Oh no, Leo, what did you do?" "Nothing yet," I said, the plan solidifying in my mind. beautiful and terrible in its perfect logic. But I'm about to get into the home security business. Finding someone who sells guard-grade emus isn't like looking for a golden retriever on Craigslist. It's a descent into the weird, wild underbelly of the internet. A place where websites still have blinking text and are best viewed on Netscape Navigator. After wading through forums dedicated to sovereign citizens and exotic animal enthusiasts, two groups with a surprising amount of overlap, I found him. His name was Gus, and his website, Gus's Fine, Foul, and Sundries, looked like it had been designed by a colorblind hacker in 1998. The site featured grainy, pixelated photos of various birds staring menacingly at the camera. There were no prices, no contact form, just a single, cryptic phone number. I felt like I was arranging a black market organ deal. I took a deep breath and dialed. The phone rang 7 times before a gruff voice answered with a single guttural syllable. "Yeah?" Hi, is this Gus?" I asked, trying to sound casual, like a guy who buys giant flightless birds all the time. "Might be. Who's asking?" "My name is Leo. I found your website. I'm interested in, acquiring some emus." The word felt ridiculous coming out of my mouth. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear wind and what sounded like an angry goat. "You know what you're getting into, son?" Gus finally asked, his voice gravelly, like he gargled with rocks. This was my moment. I had to sell it. "I do," I said, injecting as much confidence as I could muster. "I'm looking for something in a guard bird, a matched pair if possible, for deterrence." Another pause, this one longer. I was sure he was going to hang up. Then a low chuckle rumbled through the phone. "Guard birds," he repeated, as if tasting the words. "Haven't heard that one in a while. All right, guard bird guy. I got 2 3-month-olds, healthy, good lines. 2 for 1,000, cash, no checks, and you bring your own crate, a big one." "A big one, got it," I said, scribbling notes. "Do they get along with other animals? I have a succulent." "They'll eat anything shiny," Gus grunted. "Keys, rings, the soul of your enemies. Just keep 'em fenced, and don't turn your back on 'em till they know you." The line went dead. That Saturday, I withdrew a thick wad of cash from the ATM that made me feel like a drug runner and rented the largest dog crate I could find. Chloe watched the entire preparation with a look of profound resignation. "You're really doing this?" she said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "It's a sound investment in our domestic security, honey," I replied, wrestling the giant crate into the back of our SUV. "Think of the peace of mind." "I'm thinking of the 6-foot-tall birds that will be living in our yard," she said, "and what Brenda Wexler is going to do when she sees them." "Brenda Wexler and her illegal poultry statutes have no power here," I declared heroically. The drive to Gus's farm was a journey into another dimension. The perfectly paved roads of Quail Creek gave way to county highways, then to gravel roads, and finally to a dirt track that threatened to swallow my sensible family vehicle. His property was a chaotic collection of mismatched fences, weather-beaten sheds, and a cacophony of animal noises. As I pulled up, I saw a grizzled man in overalls and a filthy baseball cap locked in a strange, slow-motion wrestling match with an alpaca that was trying to eat his hat. It had to be Gus. He disentangled himself and ambled over, wiping his hand on his pants before deciding not to offer it. "You're the guard bird guy," he stated. "Leo," I corrected. "That's me." Gus led me past pens of angry-looking geese and oddly stoic llamas to a large enclosure at the back of his property. And there they were. They weren't the majestic 6-foot creatures of my imagination. Not yet. They were about 3 feet tall, covered in a shaggy brown and black striped down that made them look like walking feather dusters, They had huge, unblinking black eyes, long necks, and disproportionately large, three-toed feet that looked like something straight out of Jurassic Park. "There they are," Gus said with what might have been a flicker of pride. "Male and a female. Good stock." They stared at me with an unnerving, ancient intelligence. One was slightly bolder, taking a few curious, jerky steps toward me. The other hung back, watching me with what I could only describe as deep suspicion. They were perfect. "I'll take them," I said. Gus's crash course on emu care was both terrifying and completely useless. "They eat this special pellet food," he said, gesturing to a massive unlabeled bag. "And whatever bugs they find, or gravel, or bottle caps, they ain't picky. Just make sure they got water and a good strong fence, 5 feet minimum, 6 is better. They can't fly, but they can jump." He paused. "And they can run about 30 miles an hour. And they can disembowel a coyote with one kick, so, be respectful." Getting the 2 emu chicks, juveniles, really, into the crate was a slapstick nightmare. They were surprisingly strong and slippery. It was like trying to stuff 2 confused, feathered sacks of bowling balls into a suitcase. Finally, with Gus's help, we wrangled them inside. I handed him the envelope of cash. He counted it slowly, then gave me a single, firm nod. "Good luck, guard bird guy," he said, and then turned to go yell at a peacock that was on his roof. The drive home was eventful. The emus, whom I had already christened Zeus and Hera, were not happy about being in a moving box. They made a strange, chirping, drumming sound that vibrated through the entire car. About halfway home, Zeus, the bolder one, managed to pop the latch on the crate door with his beak. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a feathered head pop up in the back. His big, curious eyes blinked at me. Then he began systematically pecking at the headliner, pulling out little tufts of fabric with surgical precision. "Zeus! No! Bad guard bird!" I yelled, swerving slightly. Hera, meanwhile, had decided the best course of action was to poop, profusely. The smell was indescribable. I drove the rest of the way with all the windows down, my eyes watering, while Zeus continued his interior decorating project. I pulled into my pristine driveway in the Manors at Quail Creek, my car smelling like a petting zoo fire and feathered tufts floating in the air. This was it. The die was cast. The birds were here. Chloe met me at the door, her expression a perfect blend of horror, disbelief, and grudging amusement. She peered into the back of the SUV. Zeus stared back at her, a piece of headliner fluff stuck to his beak. "Oh, Leo," she sighed, the words carrying the weight of 1,000 future arguments. "They're adorable. And they're going to be 6 feet tall. What have you done?" The first few days were a blur of frantic learning. I discovered that emus eat a staggering amount of expensive pellet food. I learned that they are fascinated by anything that reflects light, including Chloe's wedding ring, the garden hose nozzle, and their own reflection in the sliding glass door, which Zeus would peck at for hours on end. Hera, on the other hand, was the strong, silent type. She would stand perfectly still in a corner of the yard for hours, staring at a specific patch of grass as if contemplating the secrets of the universe. She was judging us. I was sure of it. We emu-proofed the yard as best we could, which mostly involved me running around picking up anything small and shiny while the emus chased me, thinking it was a game. They were growing at an alarming rate. What had been knee-high fuzzballs at Gus's farm were now waist-high, awkward teenagers. The time had come to make it official. I sat down at my computer, a self-satisfied smirk plastered on my face, and drafted my letter. It was my magnum opus of malicious compliance. To the Board of Directors, the Manors at Quail Creek, HOA, dear board members, this letter is to serve as formal notification. Pursuant to Article 5, Section 2 of the Community Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions, regarding the keeping of household pets, and the ancillary clause concerning animals kept for security purposes, please be advised that I have recently acquired two specialized guard birds to ensure the safety and security of my property. For your records, they are of the species Dromaeus novahollandiae. They are not classified as poultry or livestock under any provision of the State Agricultural Code, and thus are not subject to the prohibitions outlined in Article 4, Section 8, subsection C. Their names are Zeus and Hera. Please feel free to update your records accordingly. Sincerely, Leo Maxwell. Lot 42, a proud and secure homeowner. I printed it on the nicest cardstock I had, sealed it in a crisp envelope, and walked it over to the community mailbox myself. I had poked the bear. Now all I had to do was wait for it to wake up and roar. The quiet before the storm lasted exactly 72 hours. It was a beautiful Friday morning. I was sipping my coffee, watching Zeus and Hera engage in their morning ritual, which consisted of them taking turns trying to steal a garden gnome, and then looking startled when it didn't run away. They were now easily 4 feet tall, their fuzzy chick down replaced with shaggy, grayish-brown feathers. They looked less like birds, and more like 2 startled, hairy old men who had lost their pants. That's when I saw it. The gleaming white golf cart, the official chariot of the Quail Creek HOA, cresting the hill at the end of our cul-de-sac. At the helm was Brenda Wexler, a visor pulled low over her impeccably coiffed hair, her back ramrod straight. She was on her morning patrol, a ritual she performed with the grim determination of a prison warden inspecting the cell blocks. I ducked behind the curtain, my heart thumping with a giddy mix of fear and excitement. This was the moment of truth. Brenda's cart slowed as it approached my house. I could see her eyes scanning my property, checking for infractions. Lawn height, compliant. Mailbox, regulation bronze. Trash cans, properly stowed. Then her gaze drifted to the backyard. Her head snapped back as if she'd been tasered. The golf cart wobbled to a dead stop in the middle of the road. Her mouth fell open. For a full 30 seconds, she just sat there, utterly frozen, a statue of pure, uncomprehending rage. Zeus, as if on cue, let out a deep, guttural drumming sound from his throat and puffed out his chest, an impressive display of guard birdness. The spell was broken. Brenda slammed the golf cart into park and marched toward my front door with the kind of purposeful stride that usually precedes a military coup. I met her on the porch, leaning against the doorframe with a casualness I absolutely did not feel. "Good morning, Brenda," I said cheerfully. "Lovely day for a patrol." She ignored the pleasantries. Her eyes were wide, her face flushed. She pointed a trembling finger toward my backyard. "What are those?" she demanded, her voice a strained whisper. "Oh, them?" I said, feigning surprise. "Those are Zeus and Hera, my new guard birds. Very effective deterrent against, undesirables." "They look like feather dusters on meth," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You know the rules, Leo. I sent you a letter, no poultry." I held up a calming hand, adopting the patient tone of a teacher explaining a simple concept to a particularly dense student. "Ah, and that's where you're mistaken, Brenda. I did my research. They aren't poultry. Technically they're ratites, from the order Struthioniformes, not galliforms. It's a completely different genus. I can show you the printouts from the State Agricultural Code, if you'd like. It's fascinating stuff, really." Brenda stared at me, her brain seemingly unable to process the words ratite and genus. She sputtered, searching for a foothold in a conversation that had suddenly become far too ornithological for her liking. "I don't care if they're diamond-encrusted peacocks from Mars. They are giant, weird birds, and they do not belong in Quail Creek." "They're my security system," I said with a shrug. The handbook allows for animals for security purposes. Are you saying you want my family to be unsecured? That last line was a stroke of genius. It hit her right in the HOA buzzwords. Of course not, she snarled. But this is a violation of the spirit of the law. The spirit of the law doesn't pay HOA dues, Brenda. The letter of the law does, I said, smiling sweetly. You'll find my official notification in the community mailbox. Have a wonderful day. She stood there for another moment, vibrating with impotent fury, then spun on her heel and marched back to her golf cart. The war had officially begun. I knew Brenda wouldn't take this lying down. Her next move was predictable. If she couldn't get me on an HOA violation, she'd try to get me on a city ordinance. 2 days later, a police cruiser rolled slowly down our street. Chloe saw it first. "Leo, cops." I looked out to see 2 officers, a man and a woman, stepping out of their car and cautiously approaching our house. They looked profoundly bored, like they'd been called out for the 10th time about a teenager's loud music. I met them at the door. "Good afternoon, officers. Something I can help you with?" The male officer, whose name tag read Miller, gestured vaguely toward the backyard. "Sir, we received a call about some, aggressive, unidentified creatures in your yard." "Unidentified?" I feigned a look of deep concern. "That's alarming. Let me see." I craned my neck to look past them. "Oh, you must mean Zeus and Hera." Right on schedule, Zeus, who had been hiding behind a large azalea bush, popped his head over the top. He tilted his head, his big eyes blinking slowly. Officer Davis, the woman, took a half step back. "Sir, did you know you have ostriches in your yard?" she asked, her voice impressively professional. "Emus, actually, officer," I corrected gently. "And they're my registered guard birds. Perfectly legal. Can I get you a glass of water? You look a little warm." Officer Miller just stared, his hand resting near his sidearm, as if he was calculating the odds of having to tase a giant bird. "Guard birds," he repeated, the words sounding alien in his mouth. "What do they guard?" "My property," I said earnestly. "From negative vibes, mail theft, unsolicited sales calls. They're very vigilant." Hera chose that moment to emerge from behind the garage. She walked with a slow, deliberate gait, her head held high, and stopped to stare directly at Officer Miller, unblinking. It was an unnervingly effective intimidation tactic. "Okay," Officer Davis said slowly, pulling out a notepad. "So, they're your pets?" "Security animals," I corrected. I then launched into my prepared speech, presenting them with my official notification letter to the HOA and the printout of the state agricultural code that differentiated retites from poultry. As I was explaining the legal nuances, Zeus, emboldened by my calm demeanor, decided to investigate. He trotted over to the officers, stretched his long neck out, and began gently but persistently pecking at a shiny button on Officer Miller's uniform. Sir," Miller said, not moving a muscle. "Your security animal is attempting to consume my uniform." "He's just inspecting it for weaknesses," I said. "Very thorough." Officer Davis was now actively trying to suppress a laugh, biting her lip and scribbling furiously in her notepad. After a few more minutes of surreal conversation, they seemed to decide that no actual crime was being committed. "All right, Mr. Maxwell," Officer Miller said, carefully extricating his button from Zeus's beak. "As long as they're contained on your property and not a danger to the public, this appears to be a civil matter. We'll let the caller know." They got back in their cruiser, and I could see them both laughing as they drove away. It was a massive victory. I had a police report stating that this was a civil matter. Brenda's first salvo had been deflected. The next challenge came in the form of a man named Sal. We had contracted him months ago, pre-Emu, to build a new stone patio in the backyard. Sal was a tough, no-nonsense, old-school contractor with a permanent scowl and forearms like bags of cement. He showed up one Monday with his two-man crew, ready to work. He took one look at Zeus and Hera, who were curiously observing his truck from a distance, and stopped dead. "What the hell are those?" he grunted. "That's my security team," I said. "Zeus and Hera, just ignore them. And don't leave your tools lying around, especially the shiny ones." Sal just shook his head and muttered something in Italian. The first day was a master class in interspecies chaos. Sal's crew tried to lay out their string lines, and Zeus followed behind them, pulling up the stakes with his beak as soon as they were in the ground. Hera, meanwhile, had appointed herself supervisor. She stood about 10 feet away from where the crew was digging, staring at them with her unblinking, judgmental gaze. After an hour of this, one of the younger guys, a kid named Marco, got so unnerved he had to take a break. "Man, it's like she's looking right through me," he told Sal. "Like she knows all my secrets." The real fun started when they broke for lunch. Marco left his sandwich on a cooler. He turned his back for 5 seconds, and when he turned back, Zeus was standing there, a triumphant look in his eye, the last corner of a ham and Swiss sandwich disappearing down his gullet. But the peak of the week came on Thursday. The crew had a bag of cement mix open. Zeus, in a fit of playful exuberance, got a running start and kicked the bag, sending a massive cloud of fine gray dust into the air. Both he and Hera, delighted by this new development, immediately flopped to the ground and began to take the most vigorous dust bath I had ever seen. When they stood up, they were no longer brown birds. They were two terrifying 6-foot-tall cement-gray ghosts. They looked like gargoyles that had come to life. Sal's entire crew just dropped their shovels and stared in silent awe. That evening, Sal cornered me as he was packing up. He was covered in dirt and sweat, and he looked exhausted. "Leo," he said, his voice heavy, "your birds are a menace." "They're just curious," I said, "and they keep the riffraff out." "Yeah, well, they just ran off with my tape measure," Sal grumbled. "And the kid Marco is convinced the female one has put a curse on him. I've been doing this for 30 years. I've dealt with angry raccoons, beehives, uncovered septic tanks. I have never dealt with this." He gestured to Zeus, who was now trying to see his reflection in the hubcap of Sal's truck. "So, are you quitting?" I asked, my heart sinking. Sal was quiet for a long time. A slow grin spread across his grizzled face. "Quitting? Hell no. This is the most interesting job I've had in a decade, but I'm adding a dinosaur hazard fee to your invoice, a big one." The Emus were becoming local legends. The neighborhood was now firmly divided into 2 camps. Team Brenda consisted of the HOA true believers, the ones who complained about kids' chalk drawings on the sidewalk. They would glare at my house as they walked their tiny, trembling dogs. But then there was Team Emu. People would slow their cars down as they passed my house, hoping for a sighting. The teenager next door, a kid named Kyle, filmed Zeus chasing the mail truck down the driveway. The mailman, a good sport named Dave, was in on the joke and would honk the horn. Kyle put it on TikTok with some dramatic Jurassic Park music. The video got 1 million views overnight with the caption, "My neighbor's guard chickens are terrifying." #HOAA Wars, #Emulafay. The comments were glorious. "That HOA has no jurisdiction in Jurassic Park," and "Petition to make this the official neighborhood watch." My greatest ally, however, was Old Man Fitzwilliam from 2 doors down. Fitzwilliam was a retired history professor who had been fighting a low-grade war with the HOA for 15 years over the unauthorized shade of blue he'd painted his garden gnome's hat. He saw me as a revolutionary. He shuffled over one afternoon while I was repairing the fence. "Magnificent work, son," he said, leaning on the fence and nodding toward the emus. "Reminds me of the Punic Wars, an unorthodox but brilliant tactical maneuver, using their own rulebook against them. Scipio Africanus would be proud." "Thanks, Fitz," I said. "I'm just trying to live my life." "Nonsense," he scoffed. "You're fighting for the soul of this neighborhood. That woman," he said, gesturing vaguely in the direction of Brenda's house, "would pave paradise and put up a parking lot with designated spots for compact cars only." Brenda, meanwhile, was not taking her defeat gracefully. She doubled down, launching a smear campaign. A new section appeared in the monthly HOA newsletter, titled Community Awareness Corner. It was just a thinly veiled chronicle of the emu menace. It cited trampled petunias. Hera had indeed flattened a bed of prize-winning begonias while chasing a grasshopper. Intimidating glares, definitely Hera, and suspicious drumming noises at dawn, Zeus's morning ritual. It was filled with grainy, long-lens photos of the emus looking particularly menacing. I cut it out and framed it. It was my first fan mail. The Cold War was in full swing, and I was winning. But I knew Brenda's final move was coming, and it was going to be big. The certified letter arrived on a Monday. It had the stiff, official feel of bad news. My name and address were typed in a severe, no-nonsense font. In the top left corner, the return address was simply The Manors at Quail Creek HOA, Office of the President. This was it. This was the nuclear option. With trembling hands, I tore it open. It was a single sheet of paper, but it carried the weight of 1,000 of Brenda's disapproving glares. "Notice of emergency HOA meeting," the top read in bold, all-caps letters. The agenda was short and brutally to the point. A special session of the Homeowners Association has been called to discuss a proposed emergency amendment to the community bylaws. The proposed amendment, CC and R Article 4, Section 8, Subsection D, is as follows: to prohibit the keeping, housing, or harboring of any avian species, domestic or exotic, exceeding a height of 24 inches at maturity. Brenda wasn't just closing the loophole. She was sealing it in concrete, burying it in a lead-lined vault, and sinking it to the bottom of the ocean. 24 inches. She was specifically, surgically, and maliciously targeting my 6-foot-tall guard birds. The meeting was in 1 week. Chloe read the letter over my shoulder. Her usual amused exasperation was gone, replaced with genuine worry. "Leo, this is serious," she said, her voice quiet. "She's not just sending you a nasty letter this time. An amendment to the bylaws. That's binding. They can fine us. They can put a lien on our house if we don't comply." She was right. The giddy fun of the rebellion had suddenly evaporated, replaced by the cold reality of property law. We had a mortgage. We had neighbors. We were, despite my best efforts, adults. For a moment, I considered surrender. We could find a new home for Zeus and Hera at a farm sanctuary. We could go back to our quiet, beige life. Then I looked out the window. Zeus was delicately preening Hera's neck feathers. They were strange and chaotic, and had cost me a fortune in fence repairs and hazard fees. But they were my strange and chaotic birds. They were a symbol of my stand against the soul-crushing tide of suburban mediocrity. Brenda hadn't just targeted my emus, she had targeted my spirit. "No," I said, my voice firm. "She's not going to win, not like this." The week leading up to the meeting was a blur of preparation. I transformed my home office into a war room. I printed out every email, every newsletter, every state statute I could find. I prepared binders with tabbed sections: legal precedent, bylaw ambiguity, property rights. I was no longer just a disgruntled homeowner. I was the lead counsel for the Emu Defense Fund. My secret weapon was Old Man Fitzwilliam. He came over every evening to act as my mock trial coach. He'd put on a pair of reading glasses, adopt a stern expression, and pepper me with questions. "She'll call them a nuisance, son. What's your response?" he'd bark. They are a visual deterrent, Fitz. Their very presence enhances security and creates a talking point that fosters community engagement, I'd reply, reading from my prepared notes. "She'll bring up the petunias, the poor defenseless begonias." An unfortunate but isolated incident of collateral damage in the ongoing war against insectoid intruders. HERA was providing a valuable pest control service, free of charge to the community. "Good, good," he'd chuckle. "Hit 'em with property rights, son. It's the American dream. A man's home is his castle, even if that castle is guarded by giant flightless birds." The night of the meeting, the air was thick with tension. The soulless community center clubhouse, usually reserved for depressing potlucks and poorly attended yoga classes, was packed. It seemed every resident of Quail Creek was there. The room was divided like a church at a wedding. On one side sat Brenda's faction, the rule followers, the curtain twitchers, the people who measure their neighbor's grass with a ruler. On the other side sat my supporters, the younger families who thought the emus were hilarious, the old guard like Fitzwilliam who hated the HOA on principle, and a surprising number of people who were simply there for the drama. Brenda stood at a podium at the front of the room, looking smug and powerful. Flanked by her two loyal, bobble-headed board members, she banged a gavel. "This emergency meeting of the Manors at Quail Creek HOA is now in session," she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. She launched into her argument, clicking through a poorly designed PowerPoint presentation she had titled, "The Ratit Risk." The first slide was a grainy, zoomed-in photo of HERA staring directly at the camera, her eyes glowing red from the flash. Subsequent slides featured bullet points of the emu's alleged crimes: aggressive posturing, uncontrolled defecation, potential for property damage, and my personal favorite, creation of an environment of fear. She spoke of property values and community standards, her voice dripping with self-importance. It was a masterful performance of petty tyranny. Then, it was my turn. I walked to the podium, my binder in hand. I took a deep breath. "Good evening, neighbors," I began. "My name is Leo Maxwell, and I am the proud owner of the two Ratit risks you just saw on screen." A few chuckles rippled through my side of the room. I didn't talk about agricultural codes or legal definitions. I talked about what it felt like to move into a neighborhood where conformity was valued above all else. I talked about my simple, harmless dream of having a few chickens for fresh eggs, and how that dream was shut down by a rigid, impersonal rule book. "This amendment isn't about a 24-inch height limit," I said, looking directly at Brenda. "This is about one person's interpretation of normal. It's a targeted piece of legislation designed to punish a homeowner for finding a creative and perfectly legal way to live his life. We have a 300-page rule book that governs everything from the color of our trim to the type of flowers we can plant. Is there no room for a little bit of character, a little bit of strangeness, a little bit of joy?" I read some of the more positive comments from the viral TikTok video. I even had a signed affidavit from Sal the contractor, stating that while the emus were a colossal pain in the neck, they had effectively prevented the theft of copper piping from his truck on 2 separate occasions. Brenda was fuming. "This is ridiculous. We are not here to talk about joy. We are here to talk about rules," she shouted, banging her gavel. "Then let's talk about the rule of unintended consequences," I countered, my voice rising. What happens when we legislate away every little thing that makes this neighborhood unique? The argument was getting heated. People were starting to murmur. And that's when it happened. A commotion started at the back of the room near the side door, which had been propped open to let in some air. A series of soft, rhythmic thumping sounds, followed by a collective gasp from the people sitting near the back. Later, I would learn that Sal, on his way home from a late job, had driven by the clubhouse and seen the packed parking lot. Curious, he'd slowed down. As he did, he noticed that the side gate to my yard, which his crew had been working on, hadn't latched properly. It had swung open in the breeze. Drawn by the lights of the clubhouse and the sound of my impassioned voice, Zeus and Hera had done what any curious 6-foot-tall guard birds would do. They'd gone for a walk. Into the stunned silence of the room, a long, gray, feathery neck snaked through the open doorway. Zeus's head, with its enormous, curious black eyes, swiveled to take in the scene. He looked at the crowd, then at Brenda, then at me. He let out a deep, resonant boom, a drumming sound that vibrated through the entire clubhouse. Pandemonium! Half the room screamed, the other half burst into hysterical laughter. A woman in the front row shrieked and climbed onto her chair. Brenda's face went from flushed red to sheet white. Her carefully orchestrated meeting, her moment of ultimate triumph, had been gate-crashed by the very creature she was trying to outlaw. Hera, never one to be left out, poked her head in behind Zeus. She surveyed the chaos with a calm, regal dignity, as if to say, "Yes, this is all proceeding according to my plan." Brenda stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Her authority, so absolute just moments before, had completely and utterly vanished in a storm of feathers and laughter. It was old man Fitzwilliam who seized the moment. Standing on his chair, he bellowed over the din, "I believe we have a motion on the floor. All in favor of the amendment to ban joy, character, and these magnificent creatures say aye." Silence. All opposed? A resounding "Nay!" thundered through the clubhouse, punctuated by cheers and applause. The amendment was dead. The battle was over. And my guard birds had won the war. In the aftermath of what the neighborhood immediately dubbed the Battle of the Clubhouse, a strange and wonderful peace settled over Quail Creek. My victory hadn't just been a victory for me and my emus. It was a victory for everyone who was tired of being told what color to paint their shutters. The oppressive beige curtain had been lifted, if only just a little. Brenda Wexler was a diminished figure. Her reign of terror was over. She still drove her golf cart on patrols, but the grim determination was gone, replaced by a sort of weary resignation. She'd occasionally glance at my backyard, see Zeus and Hera regally surveying their domain, and just shake her head and drive on. We had reached a state of détente. She didn't send me letters, and I didn't let my emus attend any more public meetings. Life settled into a new, stranger, and far more interesting normal. The emus were no longer a controversy. They were a landmark. People would point my house out to visitors. "And that's the emu house," they'd say with a sense of civic pride. The viral TikTok video spawned a local trend of people posting photos of Zeus and Hera with the hashtag #QuailCreekGuardians. Sal and his crew finished the patio. On their last day, Sal, who had gone from antagonist to reluctant fan, brought a small bag of grapes. "For the gargoyles," he grunted, tossing them over the fence. Zeus and Hera gobbled them up with gusto. "Don't tell anyone I did that," he said, but he was smiling. The dinosaur hazard fee was still on the final invoice, but he'd written "worth it" in the memo line. The cops, Officers Miller and Davis, would give a little wave whenever they drove by my house. I got the feeling they used my cul-de-sac as a designated break spot, hoping to catch a glimpse of the birds. Dave the mailman now carried a pocket full of bird-safe treats and would toss a few on the lawn before making his delivery, a small offering to the feathered gods of Lot 42. I became a reluctant hero to the neighborhood's silent majority. Old man Fitzwilliam would now salute me whenever he saw me. A few weeks after the meeting, I saw that the hat on his garden gnome had been repainted from its controversial blue to a shaggy emu brown. It was the ultimate tribute. Chloe, who had been my worried but steadfast co-conspirator through it all, finally fully embraced our new life. She started an Instagram account for the birds at Zeus and Hera of the Manors, which quickly gained a few thousand followers. She'd post pictures of them chasing butterflies, napping in the sun, or staring intently at a garden sprinkler. One cool evening, a few months after the showdown, Chloe and I were sitting on our beautiful new patio. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the yard. Zeus was methodically pecking at a loose thread on a patio cushion, while Hera stood motionless, a stoic silhouette against the twilight sky. It was peaceful. It was absurd. It was home. "You know," Chloe said, leaning her head on my shoulder, "I was terrified when you brought them home. I had visions of lawyers and liens and being run out of the neighborhood on a rail." "Me too," I admitted. "Mostly the lawyer part." "But look at this," she said, gesturing around us. "You actually did it. You fought the HOA and won." "I didn't win," I said, watching Zeus finally capture the thread with a triumphant wiggle of his neck. "Freedom won. Also, a 6-foot-tall dinosaur poking its head into a window at a strategically crucial moment definitely helped." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, just enjoying the quiet end of the day. It was the same suburban quiet that had once driven me mad, but now it felt different. It felt earned. It was a backdrop for our own little pocket of wonderful weirdness. Then I noticed Hera acting strangely. She was over in the corner of the yard, where she had built a crude nest out of mulch and fallen leaves. She was shifting around, looking uncomfortable, and making a low, rumbling noise in her chest. "Is she okay?" Chloe asked, sitting up. "I don't know," I said, getting to my feet. I walked slowly toward her, not wanting to startle her. She looked up at me, blinked her huge dark eyes, and then stepped delicately away from the nest. And there, nestled in the pile of leaves, was a single, perfect, impossibly large egg. It wasn't white or brown. It was a stunning, deep avocado green, with a texture like matte porcelain. It was enormous, easily the size of my 2 fists put together. It was the most beautiful, ridiculous thing I had ever seen. I carefully picked it up. It was heavy, substantial. I walked back to the patio and held it out to Chloe. Her eyes went wide, and a slow, beautiful smile spread across her face. This was the whole reason for the fight. The simple, wholesome dream that had started it all. It had taken a war with Brenda Wexler, a trip to the fringes of society, 2 giant birds, a viral video, and a near total collapse of civic order to get here. But here it was. The prize. I held the giant green egg aloft in the fading light, a trophy from the weirdest battle ever fought. I looked at my wife, at my 2 magnificent 6-foot-tall guard birds, at my perfectly imperfect suburban home. "You know," I said, a grin spreading across my face, "after all that, I could really go for an omelet."